Vader's shoulder armor was massive. Layers of heavy plating on each side, bulky enough to pin his arms into a limited range of motion. So severe that he physically could not raise his lightsaber above his head. His total weight in the armor hit 120 kilograms. Watch Anakin Skywalker in the Clone Wars. Fluid, acrobatic, blindingly fast overhead strikes delivered with the ease of a man born to hold a lightsaber. Now watch Vader in the original trilogy. The difference is staggering. Every swing is heavier, slower, more deliberate. Where Anakin flowed, Vader grinds. Where Anakin leapt and spun, Vader plants his feet and brings the blade down like a man swinging an axe. He never lifts his blade to a high guard, not once. Every swing stays lateral, downward, always across or chopping down, never sweeping up. This was the most agile fighter the Jedi Order ever produced, and he'd been turned into a battering ram. And yet, in the climax of Return of the Jedi, this same man grabs Emperor Palpatine, hoists him bodily over his head, and hurls him down a reactor shaft. What? That's not a plot hole. That's not sloppy filmmaking. That is the entire story of Darth Vader's suit, compressed into 2 incompatible images. And the reason those facts coexist is so much darker and more calculated than the movies ever spelled out for you. But first, quick contrast to set the stakes, because people mix these up and they really shouldn't. Kylo Ren wears a mask. Looks cool, sounds intimidating, serves 0 medical function. None. It's cosplay. Snoke mocked him to his face in The Last Jedi, called him a child in a mask, and Kylo got so rattled he smashed the thing into a wall, later rebuilt it, then smashed it again, because he could, because taking it off meant nothing except a bruised ego. Vader wears a mask because without it he suffocates in minutes. That rhythmic breathing isn't atmosphere. It isn't a sound effect. It's a ventilator keeping a burned man alive, pumping air into lungs that were scorched on the banks of a lava river on Mustafar. And the man who designed that ventilator? Same man who set him on fire. Same man who stood in the operating room while the armor was bolted onto what was left of Anakin Skywalker's body. Hold that thought. Palpatine didn't stumble into building a cage. He built one because he understood exactly what was locked inside it. Anakin Skywalker wasn't just powerful, he was the chosen one, the single most force-sensitive being ever born, the highest midichlorian count the Jedi had ever recorded, raw potential that dwarfed anything the Order had produced in 1,000 years. Palpatine spent over a decade grooming him, manipulating him, befriending a lonely slave boy from Tatooine, and slowly, patiently, methodically, turning him into a weapon pointed at the Jedi Order and the Republic itself. Years of whispered conversations, years of manufactured trust. An investment of time and manipulation so thorough it makes every other villain in fiction look like an amateur. Then Mustafar happened, and the weapon burned. George Lucas laid out the math during the Revenge of the Sith commentary in terms that leave 0 room for debate. Anakin had the potential to become roughly twice as powerful as Palpatine. After the injuries, 4 limbs gone, lungs destroyed, body burned beyond recognition, Vader dropped to approximately 80% of the Emperor's current power. Read that again. Twice as powerful as the Emperor, reduced to 80%. That's the gap between an apprentice who could crush his master like a paper cup and one who sits permanently, safely, below the ceiling. Now, if you think a Sith Lord who single-handedly orchestrated the fall of a galactic democracy, who played the Senate, the Jedi Council, the Separatists, and 2 galactic armies against each other simultaneously without anyone catching on until it was decades too late, just shrugged and said, well, that's unfortunate, when his most valuable asset arrived on the operating table as a charred torso, missing all 4 limbs. You haven't been paying attention to how Palpatine operates. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about Vader's suit. It wasn't the best the Empire could build. It wasn't close. It wasn't in the same star system as close. The galaxy had cybernetic technology sophisticated enough to give Luke Skywalker a replacement hand with full tactile feedback just a few years later. A hand so good he could feel the prick of a needle through synthetic skin. General Grievous was already running around as a full cyborg combat platform, swinging 4 lightsabers simultaneously with mechanical precision. The tech existed. Palpatine commanded the industrial resources of millions of star systems, the engineering talent of entire planetary civilizations, military R&D budgets that could have funded a small galaxy. He could have built Vader something extraordinary, something that restored his mobility, maximized his remaining potential, turned the broken shell of Anakin Skywalker into something even more dangerous than what Mustafar had destroyed. Instead, Vader got prosthetic limbs described in legend sources as incredibly heavy and purposely badly made. Purposely. That word does a lot of heavy lifting. His total suit weight hit 120 kilograms. Those massive shoulder pauldrons weren't protective overkill. They were movement restrictors that turned the galaxy's most agile lightsaber fighter into a man who couldn't even raise his blade above his head. Gone were the acrobatic leaps and blindingly fast Form 5 Gem-So strikes that made Anakin a nightmare in the Clone Wars. Gone was the fluid overhead work, the spinning attacks, the airborne combat that had separatist generals panicking at the sound of his starfighter. In their place, slow, grinding, heavy chops that used the suit's mass as a weapon because the suit left him no other option. He adapted, because he was brilliant, and because 20 years is a long time to figure out how to fight inside a prison. He learned to use the weight, the momentum, the sheer terrifying force of a 120-kilogram armored monster bearing down on you with a plasma blade. Effective? Absolutely. Terrifying? Without question. But this was Anakin Skywalker, and somebody gave him junk on purpose. And here's what makes that fact go from suspicious to damning. The technology to do better wasn't theoretical. It was proven, available, and deployed elsewhere in the galaxy. Palpatine commanded the industrial resources of millions of star systems, the engineering talent of entire planetary civilizations, military R&D budgets that could have funded a small galaxy. He looked at what was possible and chose to give his most valuable asset crude, heavy, limited junk instead. He didn't want Vader at full capacity. He wanted Vader exactly where he was, caged, useful, controllable. This is where most Vader suit videos stop. Cool armor facts, tragic backstory, sad music, maybe a mention that it hurt. Done. Roll credits. Thanks for watching. This is where this one actually starts, because the physical restrictions, the weight, the clunkiness, the shoulder armor that hobbled a master duelist, that's the cage you can see, the obvious one. The one you notice when you're watching the fights and thinking, why does he move like that? There's a second cage underneath it, one that almost nobody talks about, one that doesn't show up on screen because you can't see the Force, but the people who know Vader's story inside and out will tell you it's the more devastating prison by far. It concerns what the suit does to Vader's connection to the Force itself. When Anakin lost his limbs on Mustafar, he lost living cells. Midichlorians, the microscopic organisms that serve as the conduit between a Force user and the Force itself, exist in living cells. Fewer cells means a diminished conduit. That part is biological damage, a consequence of the duel with Obi-Wan. Terrible, but organic, an injury. The suit made it worse, on purpose. Those crude prosthetics didn't just weigh Vader down physically. They created walls of dead metal where living tissue should have been. And every inch of dead metal was another inch of silence in a connection that used to sing. The neural interfaces jammed into Vader's burned skull were imprecise and disorienting, harsh and crude in ways that actively interfered with the deep, intuitive Force sensitivity Anakin once wielded as naturally as breathing. Like sticking your fingers in your ears at a symphony. You can still hear the orchestra, sure, muffled, distant, but the clarity, the richness, the nuance, the full range of perception that separated Anakin Skywalker from every other Force user alive, that was gone. And the helmet made things worse in its own quiet way. Vader didn't see the world the way you and I see it. He saw it through red-filtered lenses that flattened depth and stripped color, fed through a visual interface that processed everything with a fraction of a second delay. Just enough to feel wrong. Just enough to keep him permanently one step removed from the reality he was looking at. His auditory input was filtered through the helmet's sensors, meaning every sound arrived processed, compressed, slightly artificial. 20 years of never hearing a human voice without it being run through electronics first. 20 years of never seeing a face without it being tinted the color of blood. The suit didn't just cage his body and dampen his force connection. It placed a permanent barrier between Vader and the raw sensory world, a filter between him and reality itself that he could never remove without dying. This was the man who, as Anakin, had piloted starfighters with preternatural instinct, feeling the battle through the Force, reacting to threats before his instruments registered them, trusting his senses completely because his senses were extraordinary. Now those senses were walled off behind crude electronics that gave him just enough to function and not one fraction more. Vader could still use the Force, powerfully. He could choke officers from across a Star Destroyer, hurl heavy machinery with a gesture, sense disturbances across light years of space. He was still one of the most dangerous Force users in the galaxy. But one of the most dangerous isn't the most dangerous, and that gap is exactly where Palpatine wanted him. Because this wasn't an engineering limitation. If Palpatine had wanted to build a suit that maximized Vader's remaining Force potential, advanced neural bridges that worked with his nervous system instead of against it, lightweight materials that didn't deaden his proprioception, precision interfaces that enhanced rather than muffled his connection to the Force. He had the resources to do it 10 times over. The entire Imperial war machine was at his disposal. He chose not to. Deliberately. Strategically. With the cold precision of a man who'd spent decades planning every move 17 steps ahead. He gave Vader a sensory cage, powerful enough to crush rebel cells and hunt down the last surviving Jedi scattered across the galaxy. Never powerful enough to turn that strength on his master with any realistic shot at winning. The logic is pure Sith, ancient, ruthless, and airtight. The rule of two, codified by Darth Bane roughly a millennium before the Empire rose, holds one foundational truth that governs every Sith relationship. The apprentice will eventually try to kill the master. That's not a bug, not a failure state. That is the system working exactly as designed. The strong replace the weak. The student surpasses the teacher. And if the teacher doesn't want to be surpassed, well, the teacher had better make sure the student never quite gets strong enough. Palpatine knew this intimately, not theoretically. He knew it because he'd murdered his own master, Darth Plagueis, in his sleep. He had literally run the playbook himself. Pre-Mustafar, Palpatine wanted Anakin at full power. He believed psychological control was enough. The grooming, the manipulation, the slow poisoning of Anakin's trust in the Jedi, the manufactured father-figure relationship that made Anakin feel more understood by a Sith Lord than by the Order that raised him. Those were the leashes, emotional ones, and they held. Post-Mustafar, the equation changed completely. Vader wasn't the conflicted young man Palpatine had seduced. He was a creature of unfiltered rage, trapped in a body he hated, stripped of everyone he'd loved, existing in constant agony. The psychological levers were spent. Vader might at any point decide his master was the source of all his suffering, because his master was the source of all his suffering, and lunge for the throat. So Palpatine needed mechanical control. A leash Vader wore every second of every day and could never remove without dying. The suit wasn't just uncomfortable. The needle interfaces pressed into burnt skin. The prosthetics fit poorly against damaged nerve endings. Constant, grinding, never-ending pain from a dozen sources simultaneously. And the one place Vader could briefly remove the helmet, his meditation chamber, offered minutes of partial relief before the cycle started again. Sleep deprivation wasn't a side effect. It was a feature. Pain fuels the dark side. Palpatine could frame the suffering as making you stronger, a gift from master to apprentice, while it actually kept Vader exhausted, destabilized, and too ground down to think clearly about rebellion. Imagine working 20 years as the most feared enforcer in the galaxy while being sleep-deprived and in constant pain every single second, and knowing the man who built your pain is the same man giving you orders. That's Vader's life inside the cage. And when Vader showed signs of testing the boundaries, when he started pushing back, questioning, probing the limits of the leash, Palpatine didn't respond with negotiation. He responded by tightening the cage. In the years between the original trilogy's major events, Palpatine punished Vader's disobedience by having him broken down further, literally, stripping away what little autonomy the suit afforded, reminding him through pain and humiliation that the cage could always get smaller, that the suffering had a dial and the Emperor's hand was on it. Every act of defiance was met with a recalibration, not enough to destroy his usefulness, but enough to make the message unmistakable. You exist at my pleasure, and my pleasure can change. But here's what kept me turning this over. Everything I just described, the weight, the force dampening, the pain, the exhaustion, the tightened screws, that's containment. It's Palpatine keeping Vader below the threat line, making sure the ceiling stays just low enough that his apprentice can never quite punch through it. And for 20 years, that containment worked. But containment has a failure mode. What if, despite all of it, despite the weight, the dampened force, the constant pain, every suppressive measure grinding him down day after day for 2 decades, Vader just decides to go for it anyway? What if some unforeseeable moment pushes him past every limiter and he lunges for the Emperor's throat regardless of the odds? Containment assumes the subject accepts the cage. What happens when he doesn't? Palpatine needed a kill switch. Think about this for exactly 1 second. Just one. Palpatine is a Force lightning user. It's his signature weapon, his calling card. The power he used to disfigure Mace Windu and torture Yoda. Force lightning is Palpatine's thing. It is, in every meaningful sense, his personal weapon. And he built his only apprentice, the one person in the galaxy who might someday try to kill him, a life support suit where every critical system is fatally vulnerable to electrical disruption. Every single system. The respirator that pumps air into his destroyed lungs. The cardiac support regulating a heart that can't maintain rhythm on its own. The neural interfaces connecting his brain to the prosthetic limbs that let him move, fight, function as something more than a torso on a table. All of it. Every piece of technology standing between Vader and death, shorts, fries, and dies when hit by the one power Palpatine wields better than anyone alive. That is not a design flaw. That is not an oversight by some Imperial engineer who forgot to add surge protectors. Say it with me. That is a feature. When Force lightning hits the suit, it doesn't just sting, it cascades. The respirator shorts out. No more air. The cardiac support flatlines. The heart stutters and begins to fail. The neural links sear and go dark. The prosthetic limbs start losing connection to the brain controlling them. Every system keeping Vader alive begins failing. Not one at a time, but in a chain reaction, each failure triggering the next. And because his organic body can't sustain itself for more than a few minutes without that support, the lightning doesn't just break the suit, it kills the man inside it. And here's the part that should give you chills. No one else in Vader's world uses Force lightning. Not a single person. No Jedi. They consider it a dark side corruption. No Imperial officer. No bounty hunter. No rival. No enemy combatant in the entire galactic civil war. The only being who can press this particular button is Palpatine. He gave Vader a suit that kept him alive, and then made that suit fatally allergic to his own signature weapon. A self-destruct code hardwired into every circuit, and only the Emperor knows the activation sequence, because only the Emperor has the power to trigger it. If Vader ever turned, Palpatine could end him in seconds. Not through a lightsaber duel, not through some elaborate Force confrontation where the outcome was uncertain. Just lightning. System failure. Death. Clean, fast, certain. And Vader had to know. He wasn't stupid. He was the opposite of stupid. This was the kid who built a pod racer from scrap parts at 9 years old on a junk planet where the only resources available were other people's garbage. The kid who assembled C-3PO, a fully functional protocol droid, from salvage. Anakin Skywalker understood engineering at an intuitive level most people never approach in a lifetime. Somewhere during 20 years inside that suit, 20 years of maintenance, of studying every system keeping him alive during the long, painful hours in his meditation chamber when sleep wouldn't come, he must have recognized the vulnerability wasn't accidental. Must have traced the circuits and understood what they meant. Must have looked at the engineering and seen the fingerprints of the man who ordered it built. And that knowledge is its own prison. Because knowing the cage exists and being unable to escape it is worse than ignorance. Every moment of service, every order followed, every time Vader knelt before the throne, every mission carried out without question, the kill switch was humming in every circuit, and the man sitting above him was the only person in the galaxy who could pull the trigger. Vader served not just out of dark side loyalty, but with the constant, gnawing awareness that defiance meant death. Not eventual death, not a fight he might lose. Instantaneous, systematic, guaranteed destruction. Palpatine even twisted the knife further. His growing interest in Luke Skywalker wasn't just about acquiring a powerful new apprentice. It was a message aimed squarely at Vader. You are useful, but you are not irreplaceable. I built one weapon, I can build another. The rule of two doesn't offer retirement packages. You serve until you're strong enough to take the throne, or you serve until you're replaced. And the cage made certain that the first option was never, ever on the table. So here's the full picture. Lay each element out side by side. Take any single component in isolation, and it's got a plausible, innocent explanation. Armor's heavy, sure, it's protective. Prosthetics have limits, fair, technology isn't perfect. Electronics don't love power surges, that's basic physics. But assemble them, stack them, the weight restricting combat mobility, the crude interfaces dampening force sensitivity, the helmet filtering every sight and sound through electronics that kept Vader one step removed from reality, the constant pain keeping him exhausted and psychologically destabilized, the deliberate choice to use inferior technology when Palpatine was simultaneously funding superior cybernetics for potential replacements, and the lightning vulnerability handing Palpatine, and only Palpatine, an instant kill. The pattern is undeniable. Every single design choice serves one function: keeping the most dangerous Force user in galactic history permanently, safely, beneath his master's control. This isn't a suit. It's a masterclass in control engineering, built by a man with 1,000 years of Sith doctrine telling him his apprentice would eventually come for him, and who decided to rig the game so completely that the attempt would be suicide. For 20 years, it worked perfectly. The second Death Star. 4A-B-Y. The Emperor's throne room, suspended high above the reactor core in a battle station the size of a moon. Palpatine is seated on his throne, watching through the massive viewport as the rebel fleet dies in the trap he'd spent months engineering. Everything is going according to plan. Everything always goes according to plan. Luke Skywalker has done what Palpatine didn't quite predict. He's thrown down his lightsaber, refused the dark side, declared himself a Jedi, like his father before him. A bold move, a principled move, a fatal one. Palpatine, with the cold patience of a man who has toppled civilizations and dissolved democratic institutions without anyone realizing until the applause stopped, decides that if Luke won't turn, Luke will die. And he'll make Vader watch. Because that's the kind of cruelty that comes naturally to someone who spent 20 years designing a prison for his own enforcer. The lightning begins. This is not a warning shot. Palpatine pours killing voltage into Luke, arcs of blue-white energy that lift the young Jedi off the ground and curl him into a screaming wreck on the throne room floor. The same power that disfigured Mace Windu, the same power that tortured Yoda. Luke is 23 years old, barely trained, and has no lightsaber to deflect with because he threw it away 30 seconds ago. He can't defend himself. He has nothing. All he can do is scream. And through the agony, through the voltage shredding through his body and the certainty that he's about to die, he calls out to his father. Vader stands beside the throne and watches. The cage is working perfectly. The suit suppresses his force connection, just like it has every day for 20 years. The weight pins his movements, just like it always has. And the kill switch is live, because the same lightning that's murdering his son is also a message, a reminder, a warning pulsing through the room like the hum of a live wire. If you move, if you intervene, if you take a single step toward me, the next burst hits you and every system in your body shuts down. You know this. You've always known this. Palpatine isn't worried. Why would he be? The cage has held for 20 years. The leash has never broken. The math has never worked in Vader's favor, and it doesn't work now. The lightning vulnerability guarantees that the moment Vader acts is the moment Vader dies. This is the system's ultimate test, the scenario Palpatine engineered every failsafe to prevent, and he is absolutely confident, with 2 decades of evidence supporting his confidence, that it will hold. And then Vader moves. No lightsaber, no elaborate force attack, no Sith power play. Something far simpler and far more impossible. He reaches down, grabs Emperor Palpatine, and lifts him bodily overhead. The same shoulder armor that prevented him from raising his lightsaber, the same crude, heavy prosthetics that dampened his every movement since 19 BBY. The same body that had been caged and suppressed and broken and kept deliberately below its potential since the day it was bolted onto a burned man on an operating table while Palpatine watched. Vader raises the Emperor above his shoulders, and Palpatine, in shock and fury, does exactly what the suit was designed to guarantee would end this. He turns the lightning on Vader. The kill switch fires. And what happens next is a man dying on his feet, mid-stride, and refusing to stop. The respirator shorts out. No more air cycling through destroyed lungs. The cardiac support flatlines. The regulated heartbeat goes irregular, then chaotic. The neural interfaces burn dark. Connection to his prosthetic limbs starts to sever. The chest panel erupts in sparks, showering the walkway with burning fragments of the control systems that have run his body for 2 decades. The lights on his belt, those small, steady indicators that have always been there, always blinking, flicker and die, one by one. That rhythmic breathing, the most iconic sound in cinema, the mechanical heartbeat that has defined this character since 1977, the sound that told you Vader was in the room before you ever saw him, stutters, skips, goes ragged, starts to fail. Every circuit that kept Vader alive for 20 years is burning out in sequence. The cage is killing him exactly as designed. And Vader keeps walking. He carries Palpatine, lightning still pouring from the Emperor's fingers, still cascading through the suit, still destroying system after system, still killing him with every single step, to the railing above the reactor shaft. His legs are failing. His lungs aren't working. His heart is dying. The suit is screaming with electrical overload, and everything is shutting down, and he is dying right now, in this moment, on his feet, and he does not stop. And he throws him in. Palpatine falls into the abyss, screaming, trailing arcs of lightning that lash against the shaft walls and dissipate into nothing, into the vast empty dark of a reactor core, fitting for a man who spent his life engineering darkness. And in that one act, Vader breaks through every single limiter the suit imposed, the physical weight that restricted his arms, the force suppression that dampened his power for 20 years, the kill switch actively destroying his body in real time. 3 layers of cage, physical, spiritual, lethal, and he shatters all 3 simultaneously, in one movement, in one decision. Not because he found some clever workaround, not because the engineering failed, but because something inside him overrode every calculation the cage was designed to exploit. It costs him everything. After Palpatine falls, Vader collapses. The suit is destroyed. Not damaged, destroyed. Smoking, sparking, systems failing in cascade, the breathing mechanism producing sounds it was never designed to make. Luke drags his father across the hangar bay floor to a shuttle ramp, and Vader, dying, barely functional, running on whatever biological reserves a burned man has when every machine keeping him alive has been fried, asks the one thing the suit never allowed in 2 decades. He asks Luke to remove the mask. Luke hesitates. The mask is what's keeping him alive. What's left of the life support is already failing, and taking it off means the end. Final. Irreversible. Vader knows. He asks anyway. He wants to see his son with his own eyes, not through the red-filtered lenses of a helmet designed by the man who enslaved him, not through the visual interface of a prison that had stood between him and the unfiltered world for over 20 years. With his own eyes, Anakin Skywalker's eyes, which had been sealed behind that mask since he was 22 years old. Luke lifts the mask, and for the first time in over 20 years, Anakin Skywalker looks at another person's face without the filter of the cage between them. No red tint, no processed audio, no delay. Just a father seeing his son. The boy he never held, the child he never raised, the young man who just watched him choose death over the cage. And then he dies. Anakin Skywalker. Not Darth Vader. Anakin. Palpatine built the perfect prison. Overlapping systems of physical restriction, force suppression, sensory isolation, constant pain, and a kill switch only he could activate. He modeled every variable the Sith playbook contained: rage, ambition, the apprentice's desire to overthrow the master, the hunger for power that drives every Sith who has ever lived. He mapped the threat landscape with the precision of a man who had spent decades outmaneuvering Jedi Masters and galactic senators. He built a system so airtight that the most powerful Force user in history spent 2 full decades as a compliant weapon, never once breaking containment. And for 20 years, every failsafe held. But Palpatine's entire model rested on one assumption: that Vader would only ever act out of self-interest, out of rage, out of ambition, out of hunger for the throne. Those were the variables the cage was designed to suppress, and suppress them it did. He never accounted for love. He never modeled the possibility that Vader would break every limiter, not to seize power, not to claim the Empire, not to sit on the throne himself, but to save someone else. The cage was engineered to prevent Darth Vader from acting. It was never built to prevent Anakin Skywalker from coming back. And in the end, that's the distinction that shattered every failsafe Palpatine ever designed. A father heard his son screaming and decided that no cage, no kill switch, no amount of pain, and not even the certainty of his own death was going to stop him from answering. It really shows how much he had turned. Not turned to the dark side, turned back. 20 years inside a suit designed, component by component, circuit by circuit, failsafe by failsafe, to make sure this exact moment could never happen. And a man who burned through all of it, at the cost of his life, because his son needed him. Palpatine thought of everything. He just never thought of that. Subscribe for more stories like this one.